let's take the first question here let's see who's going to be our first contestant here. Hi, what's your name?
Hallie Jackson.
Hi, Hallie, and what grade are you in?
I'm in 10th grade.
So you're 10th grade, and do you have any brothers and sisters?
I have a younger brother.
And is he nice to you?
Sometimes.
Sometimes? How old is he?
He's in 7th grade.
Okay. And do you play any sports, Hallie?
Softball.
All right. That's in the spring here or in the fall?
Yep, the spring.
Good. What's your question, Hallie?
Why can't women be priests? Are we not all equal in God's eyes?
Okay. Well, let me ask you a question. Would you like to be a priest?
No.
I mean, if you did, I thought we'd sign you up, because we need priests, all right? But it's a good question. That question is out there, right? And maybe it's a little bit of a theoretical question for you, but for some people it's a real question, right? And I've handled that before. And I've thought a lot about it, and I think one of the reasons, and I'll give you two reasons, right? I think one reason is because women have more important things to do. Now, that might sound almost heretical. What could be more important than being a priest? Well, being a mother, taking care of a sick child, is more important if that's the mother for the child, or taking care of a husband who has special needs. And sometimes I think we don't understand the great service and vocation that women have by their very nature. Their very nature. If you were a priest and you were married, you wouldn't have time to take care of your kids, let alone take care of your house, take care of your husband, or do any other things. I know as myself as a priest, if I were married, I certainly couldn't take care of the sick or all the other things that I have to do. Now then, there's also a theological reason why women are not priests, and that gets back to what Jesus did. As Christians, we believe Jesus is God, and therefore we believe that what he says is true. And so we go all the way back to the time that he chose his 12 apostles, and he conferred upon them the order of the sacrament of orders on Holy Thursday. It's not because a priest can be holier than others. And what really counts in the church is holiness. Who was the holiest saint ever? Do you know, Hallie? Do you know?
No.
Well, it was Mary, and she's a woman, isn't she? Mary is the mother of God, mother of Jesus, holiest saint ever. And that's what's important. Is holiness, personal sanctity. Sometimes we think, well, we're all equal in God's eyes. That's true. We're equal in terms of dignity, but we're not equal in terms of whether you're male or female. I can't be a mother any more than you could be a father. I'm a male, you're a female. I went out for the basketball team in junior high school, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade. I got cut every year. I was discriminated against. But the coach didn't think it was unjust discrimination. I just realized that wasn't the talent God gave me. Besides, I'm kind of short, But some short people are good at basketball. And so you learn to realize that God has gifted you with different things. Well, thank you very much for the question. Let's move on to our next question. If you're just tuning in right now, we are broadcasting live from Providence Academy in Plymouth, Minnesota. It is a school for K through 12. Over 900 students here, saving taxpayers millions of dollars a year. Yes, it is. Saving taxpayers millions of dollars a year. Hi, what's your name?
Madison Lind.
Madison, and what grade are you in?
I'm a sophomore.
All right, and is school hard here?
Sometimes.
All right. Do you give you a lot of homework?
Sometimes.
And how far do you have to travel to get here? How far do you have to travel to get to school?
Like 15 minutes.
And do you drive or someone drives you?
No, my dad drives me.
Oh, that's pretty nice. Do you thank him when he drops you off?
Not usually.
All right. Well, let me give you some advice. Thank him, and you'll be amazed at the things he does for you. And when he picks you up, thank you, Dad. That's awesome. You didn't have to do that for me. All right, what's your question, Madison?
My question is, why would God give us free will if he knew we would disobey?
Interesting. And that's not just a theoretical question. We all disobey God, right? We're the only creatures in the universe that have that free will besides the angels. And because we have free will, we can choose to love God. But we can also choose not to love God. God left us free so that we could love him, so that it's a personal relationship. And love must be free. But to love God, we need his help. And that invites us into a personal relationship with God. Now, freedom has great potential for it, for good or for bad. And we all have the experience of having disobeyed God. But hopefully he uses that so that we grow in humility, ask him for pardon, and begin again. And that's a great thing about a relationship with God. When we ask him for pardon, he gives us mercy, and we can begin again. Now, St. Paul asks that same question when he writes to the Romans. He says, I see another law warring within me. I don't do the things I know I should do. I'm sure we've all had that experience before. You make a resolution and you break it. Why don't I do those things that I should do? In fact, I remember years ago when I was at the boys' school, there was a sophomore who in high school did something rather stupid. He tried to burn down a brand new sports van we had. He had a Bic lighter, so why not burn it down, right? Well, so when the headmaster was talking to him, I said, I bet when you asked him why he did that, he looked at you with a blank stare and said, I don't know. And he said, yeah, that's exactly what he said. Right? And we look at that. Why don't I do the thing I know I should do? And it's because God has given us that freedom. But we have that chance to begin again. And that's why the sacrament of confession is so helpful to us, especially as Catholics. You always get a second chance. That's pretty good. You know, when you take the ACT exam, you don't get a total second chance. They average it, don't they? And the SAT exam, you don't get a total second chance. They average it. Or you take the CPA exam, you don't get a total second chance. Wouldn't it be nice if you got a total second chance? You took the ACT exam and you got a 17 and said, can I do that over? Yeah. And next time you get a 34 on it, say, yeah, I got a 34 instead of an average of 26. But with God, you always get a second chance. It's pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you very much for your question. Let's take the next question here. We're with the sophomores and the freshmen at Providence Academy. I sure wish those of you who are listening today could see what I see. Good-looking group of guys and girls, well-dressed, and great program here. Beautiful school, really. Most beautiful Catholic school I've ever seen. Hi, what's your name?
My name is Stephen Kaup.
And Stephen, what year are you?
I'm in 10th grade.
10th grade. How old are you now?
I'm still 15.
Still 15, so you don't have your driver's license yet?
No.
Looking forward to it?
Yeah.
I'll bet you are, huh? All right, Stephen, what's your question?
Should Christians accept or reject the theory of evolution?
Should Christians accept or reject the theory of evolution? And I would say you can accept it if you're convinced it's true. Because all we care about as human beings is truth, whether you're Christian or not Christian. So you should accept it and hold on to it if you're convinced it's true. Some people are convinced it's true. Other people are not convinced it's true. And so the church doesn't give you a specific conclusion on it. All the church tells you that if you do subscribe to that theory of evolution, that at some point in time, God infused a mortal soul into that human being, created a unique human species. Now, back in the 30s and 40s, people were tremendously influenced by the Darwinian theory of evolution. And the common thought in the scientific community was that the human species evolved from a group of primates. Right? That was called... what was that called? Heterogenesis or polygenesis. In 1956, Pope Pius XII issued an encyclical in which he stated the Church's dogma of called monogenesis. In other words, every human being has descended from one man and one woman. In the Bible, we read about Adam and Eve, right? That's 1956. In the 1980s, two independent teams of researchers, one in Britain and one in California, looking at human DNA and taking a regression analysis, it came to the conclusion that all the human beings had to descend from one male. They call that, you could call that Adam, and one female. Now, the scientific community at this point is not agreed about when they lived. They think the male lived about 50,000 years ago. They think the woman lived about it. And so the research goes on. It's fascinating research. And the distinguishing characteristic of the human race in the fossil record is that we can talk. And then that develops later in about 7,000 BC into written language. And it's quite fascinating. So if you're convinced it's true, you can believe it. What we believe as Catholics, as Christians, at one point in time, God infused a immortal soul, into that being, and that distinguishes us from the rest of creation. In fact, I like to develop that even further. I make the daring statement that the best thing that ever happened to planet Earth is the human species. There's a lot of people out there that think the human species is a virus upon Earth. Right? We're making the Earth safe for future generations, except there's no future generations, right? And the best thing that ever happened to the human race is Jesus Christ. Right? That is really sort of a Christian vision of the whole thing. Well, that's a great question. And we love science. as human beings, we love facts. Above all, we love truth. So if you always are asking the question, is that true? You're heading in the right direction. Thank you very much for your question, Stephen. It's about 15 minutes after the hour. We need to take a little break. When we come back, we've got more of Go Ask Your Father live from Providence Academy. So stay tuned. That beautiful music you hear in the background is the choir from Plymouth, from Providence Academy here in Plymouth. So welcome back to the show, everyone. Father Rocky here, and let's get on with the show. Who's next to ask a question here? We've got a young man. I'll bet you're a sophomore in high school.
I am a sophomore.
Sophomore. What's your name?
Dominic Rouge.
Hi, Dominic. And what's your question today?
How grave a sin is it to brag about adultery?
How grave a sin is it to brag about adultery? I don't know if I've had that question before. Let me ask a question here. Is it a high school student bragging about adultery? Is it an adult bragging about adultery? What's the situation?
Adult.
Adult. That's even more serious. All right. Teenage boys tend to brag about their exploits, but many times what they're bragging about actually didn't happen. All right. That teenage boys tend to do that. For an adult to brag about adultery, I think and I want to choose my words carefully here, I think he needs to see a psychiatrist. All right? That's the sixth commandment. I'd like to put billboards up around the country because I have friends whose families are in big world of hurt because of adultery. And that's the way devil kind of tempts you. Hey, nobody will know about it, and nothing will happen, and you lose your wife, you lose your children, you lose your house, you lose your health, you look 20 years older. There's nothing glamorous about infidelity. So if a guy is bragging about it, I think he's out of his mind, all right? And maybe God will excuse him for being out of his mind, but to brag about a sin, that is an extra sin. That's called scandal. But there's something we need to recover in our language today, and it's the virtue of chastity. In fact, it sounds so unusual to even speak that word, we don't see any value in it. Right? I'd like to tell all of you, most of you will be called to marriage. And I hope you have happy marriages. I hope you are married for a long, long time. And that your husband or wife, as the case may be, is your best friend forever. But that won't happen if you don't make an effort to be chaste before marriage and in marriage. Because when you give in a little, the friendship erodes. And I tell you, one of the most beautiful things I ever saw in my life is when my father was in the hospital dying. He was 86 years old. And my mother, who was 83 years old, had Parkinson's disease, congestive heart failure, could barely walk, drove over to the hospital. The only parking space was on the other side of the lot. And I watched her from the third floor walk across the lot, little baby steps at a time, came up the elevator, walked all the way down. It just about killed her walking there. She was going to be at the side of the bed of her husband. And I never had any doubts about my parents' loyalty, commitment, and chastity to each other. And it's great to see it. 60 years later, best friends, they're helping each other. So there's a great value in the virtue of chastity. So let's pray for that person who's out of his mind, all right? Thank you very much for that question. Let's take another question. We get all sorts of questions here on Go Ask Your Father, all right? It makes radio interesting. We're not trying to sugarcoat this, and we're not trying to take anything off the table. So let's have the next question. Hi, what's your name?
I'm Matt Ferreira.
Hi, Matt. And how old are you?
15.
And where do you live?
Maple Grove.
How far is that from here?
Like 10 minutes, 15
All right.
minutes.
Do you play any sports here?
Yeah, baseball.
Oh, what a great game. What position do you play?
Outfield.
Left field, right field, center field?
Left field.
Yeah, that's a great game. I love baseball. And what's your question today, Matt?
My question is, what is the Catholic Church's position on the legalization of marijuana?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if the church has a Catholic position on the legalization of marijuana. A couple of states recently legalized it. I got first exposed to marijuana in 8th grade. I grew up in the 70s, all right? And the 70s were wild, all right? And from my experience, I'm now 53 years old. From my experience, I've never seen anything good come from it when you get into drugs, especially illegal drugs. Can marijuana be used as a narcotic or as a pain reliever? Absolutely. You can use a medicinal purpose for it. And I think sometimes the difficult thing is, well, what's the difference between having a glass of wine and having a little toke of a joint, right? What's the difference about that? Jesus drank wine. I don't think he smoked pot, all right? I just can't imagine the apostles hanging around, So, if it's legal, the thing here is with federal law, if you're a federal employee in the state of Washington, you still can't smoke pot because if it shows up in your blood on Monday morning, you get fired, right? I don't want a guy who's a pilot of a plane smoking pot. I don't want to come into the cockpit stunt. I don't want somebody in the machine shop high on dope, There's reasons for that. So it comes under the fifth commandment, which is thou shalt not kill. Part of the fifth commandment is we have to take care of our body. Part of taking care of our body is not to impair your judgment. So never get in a car and drive if you're under the influence of alcohol. Very dangerous, right? Your life comes first. Thank you very much for your question. As I said, we get all sorts of questions here and go ask your father. We got a bright group of students here, and it's good to take their questions. Hold off your questions today if you're listening live, because we're just taking the questions of the students here from Providence Academy up in Plymouth, Minnesota. Boys and girls, K through 12, about 900 students here. Fabulous facility, great athletic fields, great place to be. And we have our next student who's asking a question. Hi, what's your name?
Connor White.
Connor, how are you today?
I'm good, and you?
I'm doing well. I'd love to be here. And what grade are you in?
I'm a sophomore.
All right. You have your license yet?
No.
All right. And how many brothers and sisters do you have?
I have none.
Okay. Are you spoiled?
Yeah.
Here's an honest man. Yeah, I was spoiled too. I was the youngest of 8, so, take it while you can get it. All right, Connor, what's your question?
My question is, why do some leaders in the church speak against church's teachings?
All right, and that has a certain relevance to Minnesota right now, doesn't it? All right, why do some leaders in the church speak against church teaching? In my experience, I've never found a bishop who speaks against church teaching, and the reference point for the teaching of the church is always the local bishop, and the bishops around the world unite each other, and to the Pope. There have been a few occasions where a bishop does speak against church teaching, and the next thing you know, he's retired, quote unquote, all right? Because if we don't teach what the church teaches, we're not being faithful to Christ. There have been a few people in the press recently who dress like I do, all right, with a Roman collar, and the priests. Why do they speak against church teaching? I'd have to ask them, but I think down deep they think they know more than the church. That's rather presumptuous, all right? Now, there may be more to it than that, and I wouldn't want to guess why that is the case. I think it's very rare, but when a church leader does contradict the teaching of the church, it gets a lot of play in the secular press, ABC, NBC, CNN, Fox. They love that kind of stuff. The secular media feeds on conflict because it makes for interesting media. But I think ultimately people who are in a leadership position in the church, if they abandon the understanding of the cross, they'll abandon Jesus and his teachings. All right? I've got good news for you and bad news. Good news is we all have a chance to be saved. The bad news is there's no shortcut. It's for everyone. It's the cross of Christ. For some, that's martyrdom. For very few. For many, it's the silent martyrdom of making do with what God has given you and finding joy there, right? And I was telling people earlier that if you do abandon the sacraments, genuine Christian life disappears. So when there's confusion about important matters, it's possible that that person has abandoned the sacraments, the sacrament of confession. Without confession, you're not going to be humble. And if you're not humble, you're going to think, well, I know more than the church knows. So that could be it. Thank you for your question. Pray for those leaders, right? Pray for those leaders. It's just about 25 minutes after the hour, and we're here at Providence Academy. If you're just tuning in, Providence Academy in Plymouth, Minnesota, outside of Minneapolis. And Minneapolis is top 20 in the media markets in this country. And we're very happy to be broadcasting here on WLOL, that's 1330 AM, here in the Twin Cities, and our affiliate station up in St. Cloud, 1180 KYES, say yes to KYES, and on the internet all the time at relevantradio.com. If you can't listen to the show right now or you want to listen to it later, you can go to our website this evening, relevantradio.com, and download the archive of the show, or you can listen to the encore broadcast at 6 p.m. And we have a young lady here at the microphone. Hi, what's your name?
Tia Topluk.
Hi, Tia. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. What grade are you in?
10th.
10th grade. What's your favorite class this year?
That's a very tricky one. I would say American literature.
Oh, good. What are you reading right now?
Right now we are reading Flannery O'Connor.
As a sophomore?
Yeah.
You must be very smart. Wow. It's like a college, not like a high school. Wow. Okay, well, what's your question, Tia?
Why is abortion wrong for a woman who is raped?
Yeah, that's a hard question, isn't it? And I think in our culture, we need to do a much better job protecting women from rape. I think if the penalties against a rapist were much more severe, people would be less inclined to do these things. So we operate from some clear moral principles. The fifth commandment is thou shalt not kill. And we understand that means you can never directly kill an innocent person. Never directly kill an innocent person. And the unborn child is an innocent person. Now that puts a woman in a hard position. If she doesn't want that child, she feels violated and she feels absolutely destroyed. We have to help that woman, and we also have to help the child. Of those situations that I know of, an abortion has never helped the woman. I had a friend in high school who deeply regretted her abortion, but she found she was in a situation she had no other choice. Well, let's hold that question right here. That music tells you that we need to take a break. You're listening live to Relevant Radio. Go Ask Your Father at Providence Academy up in Plymouth, Minnesota. We'll be back after these questions. Yes, sirree. We're broadcasting live today from Providence Academy up in Plymouth, Minnesota. Bright group of young boys and young girls here. Happy to be with them. I'm your host for today, Father Rocky. Tomorrow, if you tune in, on Saturday, you'll hear the best of the Go Ask Your Father for this week. Normally, on Mondays and Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, you can either hear him on Senior Swetland. He's a Rhodes Scholar, bright guy who does the show, convert to the faith, or Father Simon, who's a professor of ancient languages at the University of St. Mary in Mundelein. Well, let's go back to the microphone. Tia, would you repeat your question for our listeners who are just tuning in around the country?
Why is abortion wrong for a woman who is raped?
Okay, I would say the reason abortion is wrong for a woman who is raped is the same reason abortion is wrong for any woman, no matter what the situation of how they've conceived the child. Now, that can put people in a very difficult position, can't it? But ultimately, we see that the child in the womb is a unique human being. And the reason we know that is because of the DNA fingerprint. So in the church, and this is what really appeals to me, it's consistent. It's not easy, but it is consistent. And that consistency you can really base an ethic on. And that's from the moment of conception, you have a unique individual human being. So in the recent political elections, I heard one politician say, well, I'm against abortion except in the case of rape, incest, and life of the mother. And I'm thinking, it's either a human being or it's not. Yeah, I mean, it either it is or isn't. It's just, consistency. And sometimes people ask me about capital punishment. In the church we're against capital punishment, and I am against capital punishment. Now I'm going to say something a little bit inflammatory, except in the case of rape and incest. All right, because the rape and incest thing is always about the abortion. The rape and incest should really be about the criminal who's violated the woman. That's where the force of the law has to be placed to deter these violent crimes. So that's the situation. I know it brings up at times hard choices, but I think our ethic in the church is women and children first. You can take care of both. So thank you for your question.